Well, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
The title of this session is Reflection and Challenges, and so I just wanted to start the discussion just to kind of set a context and just to give you some experiences that I've had at St. Francis University, and then talk a little bit about servant leadership, the importance of leadership in terms of a faith community, and then share with you some of our experiences at St. Francis University, and then kind of go from there. It's nice to have a dry erase board. Nice to be back in the classroom. St. Francis is the oldest Franciscan-sponsored institution of higher learning in the United States. We were founded in 1847. And just, again, by means of context, when we were first founded, we were founded as an academy. And as I say, we were founded to teach teenage boys how to read, write, and plant crops. That was our foundation, with an element of faith in there. And we'd like to point out that over the years, we have pivoted, we have evolved into the institution that we are today. By means of comparison and contrast, our sister institution is Franciscan University in Steubenville. We're often confused for one another. We're the same religious congregation. I'm a Franciscan of the Third Order Regular, and our religious order sponsors the two institutions. Ours is the older of the two. St. Francis, founded 1847. Franciscan University, founded in 1946. So the younger sister out there. Two very different cultures, though. The way I'm a graduate of Franciscan University, and the way the culture evolved there, when Father Michael Scanlon became president in 1974, he brought the charismatic renewal with him to Franciscan University, was able to really refound the institution based on mission. And fast forward present day, Franciscan University is a student body that is predominantly Catholic, a faculty that is predominantly Catholic, and truly a mission-centric institution. Again, by means of contrast, the path that St. Francis took over the years, we went down the road of health sciences. Almost 2/3 of our students are health sciences majors. That presents a great opportunity for us in terms of Franciscan and Catholic mission. It sets us apart in the health sciences world. Also an unlikely claim to fame is Division I athletics. And if you're familiar with the U.S. system of education, athletics is often a very important part of the college experience. We're one of the smallest Division I institutions. Institutionally presents a challenge because it's a very expensive program to run and brings a culture of its own. But on the positive side is an opportunity for the university to present itself as a both and. What I mean by both and, we are both an institution of faith and an institution with Division I athletics. Another way of marketing that, we are both a very prestigious and very good institution when it comes to academic outcomes, high job placement rates, and an opportunity for someone to compete on the Division I level. So from a marketing point of view, those are some of our sell points. Just wanted to set the stage, though, in terms of servant leadership and really how that factors into life at a Catholic and Franciscan institution. Servant leadership goes back to, is a concept that goes back to certainly biblical times, and it was most recently redefined in the secular world by Robert Greenleaf, who wrote in the 1970s on the topic of servant leadership. The servant leader, he writes, is a servant first. Servant leadership begins with the natural feeling that one wants to serve, and to serve first. This is a conscious choice that brings one to aspire to lead. So this concept really has been at the heart and soul of Christianity for 2,000 years. And we read in Scripture itself that Christ himself came to serve rather than be served. At St. Francis University, well, let me make mention first of St. Francis of Assisi. In the early 13th century, put very simply, St. Francis of Assisi founded, in quotes, several religious orders. It's not an entirely accurate statement, but to unpack that would take us down a path that would take us a little far afield this morning. But simply put in layman's terms, Francis founded 3 religious orders. At the heart, their mission was to carry out the preaching of the gospel. And over the centuries, various Franciscan orders would see the field of education as a prime way of spreading the gospel. And many religious orders went to the United States with the prime intention of founding a religious school to educate young people in both religious topics as well as secular topics. Presently in the United States, there are 24 Franciscan-sponsored colleges and universities. At one time, the religious order had exclusive governance over the institution. Again, by example, when we were founded in 1847, 6 friars founded St. Francis Academy, and the institution was governed when the 6 friars would gather together at table or gather together in chapel and discuss what to do at the institution. The system of governance obviously has evolved over the decades. In the 1960s, following the spirit of the Second Vatican Council, Catholic schools opened their boards to lay people. And then subsequently, some of these schools went from having a Franciscan priest or a brother or sister as the president to having a lay president. And this would bring challenges as well as opportunities to the governing of various institutions. And at our Franciscan-sponsored institution at St. Francis, we are a small liberal arts institution. Our board is comprised of 30 members, 25% of whom must be members of the sponsoring Franciscan order. And for our nearly 175-year history, a Franciscan president has been in charge of the university. Broadly defined, there are any number of leadership theories we could talk about, but from the point of view of governance of the institution, I'd like to focus on servant leadership. Another way of categorizing this would be transformational leadership. And I say that to say that the person who is typically in charge of any organization sets a particular tone. And so obviously you want a president who will further the mission of the institution, and one who will lead by example, one who is a person of faith himself. Transformational leadership in this situation involves taking an active concern for people as well as the institution. A transformational leader or a servant leader will involve himself with the faculty, with the various staff, and is able to effect positive changes of attitude and mindset and not merely accomplish tasks. The transformational leader is one who has feelings and not cold or impersonal, and emphasizes particular values. In the case of a Franciscan-sponsored institution, the transformational leader will place an emphasis on Franciscan values first, so that those values permeate the institution, as well as the faculty, the staff, and ultimately the students. Some very important leadership characteristics for the transformational leader or the servant leader. That individual listens receptively to what others have to say. The servant leader accepts others and empathizes with them. That leader possesses foresight and intuition. He or she is an individual who is aware and perceptive. An individual possesses highly developed powers of persuasion. It's an individual who can conceptualize and communicate those concepts. Important at times, he or she is one who exerts a healing influence upon individuals and institutions, both on the personal level as well as on the institutional level. This individual builds community, and through the lens of faith, the next two are critical. The individual practices the art of contemplation, practices prayer. And then on a personal level, finally, the servant leader begins with the desire to change one's self. And then once that process of conversion has begun, it then becomes possible to practice servant leadership at the institutional level. So clearly, if one is an individual of faith first, that's going to have an impact on the leadership, on how one leads the organization. There's also the aspect of symbolic leadership. So the leader of an institution is a transformational leader, a servant leader, but there's also the important use of symbol. The symbolic leader is not symbolic in a figurehead sense, but rather the symbolic leader is one that speaks for the university, empowers the university, and leads the university to fulfill its goals. The leader not only has his own commitment, but moves the university towards a sense of commitment itself. The leader calls others to make necessary sacrifices to achieve goals, and the symbolic leader does not ask more than the community can give, but oftentimes can ask more than it intended to ask or think possible. But a leader does have a way of accomplishing certain tasks. With that in mind, at St. Francis, like I mentioned previously, we have had Franciscan presidents throughout our entire history. I'm the 32nd president of St. Francis University. The university itself has gone through several iterations throughout its history. And we realize that with changing demographics, with fewer university students to go around, we're realizing anew the importance of faith in the institution. Now, on the one hand, it could sound obvious. We're a Catholic school, we're Franciscan sponsored, so of course faith is important to us. But as we look afresh at what our priorities are, and quite honestly, as we look at it from the standpoint of how do we attract students, we're realizing that the faith piece is really critical and that it's important now more than ever to be mission-centric. I became president in 2014, and my lead-off statement was about mission and how we are a Franciscan Catholic institution, and in all that we do, it's important to be true to our mission. And that would become very important when the institution started to suffer from enrollment challenges back in 2017. In 2017, however, St. Francis University had the privilege of welcoming Cardinal Timothy Dolan, the Archbishop of New York, to our campus. We brought the Cardinal to campus to help us honor a mutual benefactor. And as I like to say, the Cardinal put fuel in our tank in terms of saying a lot of nice things about us while he was at St. Francis. While he was on campus, I was able to point to the role of a Catholic university. It's a place of debate with civility. It's a place to wrestle with ideas. It's a place to discover truth. And it's a place also to move the focus from that which is visible to that which is invisible, to that which is transcendent. And the Cardinal himself said while he was at St. Francis, The role of a Catholic university is to help the student put the one true God first in their lives. That simple statement is very critical in pointing to the purpose of any Catholic school, particularly in a more secular age that we are living in today. The Cardinal went on to say, I get around to a lot of Catholic universities, and you can sense things about a campus when you arrive. This is a place that knows what it's about. This is a friendly, welcoming, warm place. There's a sense of focus and dedication at St. Francis University. Of course, it was a point of pride for me to hear that as president, but more importantly, it spoke to really some of the great things that are going on campus. Our Franciscan values, which permeate the life of the campus, include poverty, humility, prayer, ongoing conversion, joy, devotion to church, and faithfulness to the gospel. I just want to share with you a little story, so please indulge me. It's what I call a quaint little story. One day, a little fish was swimming in a pond, and he came close to a pier where a couple of men were fishing. He heard one of the fishermen make the observation, quote, "As strange as it sounds, a fish cannot live without water," end quote. Now, when the fish heard this, he became increasingly more upset as he thought, if a fish cannot live without water, I better find some. So he took off, swimming frantically across the pond to find water. During his search, he bumped into a large fish who stopped him and asked, "Why are you swimming so frantically to and fro across the pond?" The little fish replied, "I heard that fish cannot live without water, and I have to find some." The big fish looked with love at the smaller fish and said, calm down. The water's all around you. Just relax and breathe it in." Now, it's a great little story, and points to the fact that, on a campus or in a particular setting, the values are everywhere, and the values can permeate what we do. I use that to also set up a contrast that you don't want to take things for granted. And it's also important to look at things like ongoing conversion in one's own life, or institutional self-reflection, to ask ourselves if we really are living out our values. And at St. Francis, and perhaps at your own institutions, people are at that university for any number of reasons. For faculty and staff, things like great working conditions, tuition benefits, the collegial environment, you name it. A variety of reasons bring us to our respective institutions. But at the heart of it is a unifying belief in the mission of the institution. John Paul II wrote of, quote, what it means to be a Catholic university. He said that 4 characteristics are essential. A Christian inspiration, not only of individuals, but of the community. A continuing reflection in light of Catholic faith. Fidelity to the Christian message as it comes to us through the church. And finally, an institutional commitment to the service of the people of God and of the human family in their pilgrimage to the transcendent goal which gives meaning to life. Or as we say at St. Francis, our journey with our students as we walk with them from point to point on their faith journey. Remarks that were written 25 years ago by Franciscan scholar Ewart Cousins resonate with us today. A Franciscan university should make conscious and further the values associated with the intellectual journey. It should create an atmosphere that supports, nourishes, stimulates, and energizes growth in the intellectual life. should do the same for cultivation of respect for all people and all creation. It's an atmosphere that should be pervasive in the classroom, in the curriculum, in the library, the residence halls, the chapel, everywhere. A Franciscan scholar, Father Michael Higgins, whom some of you know, made the following observation, which I think is particularly poignant for today. St. Francis of Assisi lived at a time that Europe and the Church was confronted with a great deal of turmoil. On the political scene, the feudal system was collapsing. Nation states and cities were becoming increasingly conscious of their unique cultural and ethnic identities and were driving for independence and self-rule. In the Middle Ages, there was a rapidly growing middle class. Trade was becoming more important for the wealth of individuals, and there was the ever-present threat of Islamic encroachment. Higgins goes on to observe, at that time, the Church was confronted with both orthodox and heretical movements that challenged basic tenets of the faith and challenged the accepted ecclesial structure. But into this milieu comes the poor man from Assisi, St. Francis, who Higgins observes did his best to balance all these forces and still maintain a spirit of joy and dedication to the God he loves so much. And one way he tried to do that was to maintain that balance was with a total and open-hearted allegiance to the Church. And a similar milieu that we find ourselves today in an increasingly secular world. Today is an era of Pope Francis Catholicism, a pope who shines the focus on the poor and needy, a pope who does not judge, who is quick to challenge the status quo, but at least for the time being, leaves settled church teaching in place. There's rising nationalism. There's a United Kingdom that's trying to leave or remain, we're not quite sure. And the U.S., they're not quite sure either. And the U.S. populace on either side of a line drawn in the sand. And it's into this milieu that the poor man from Assisi enters, who does his best to balance all of these forces and still maintain a spirit of joy and dedication to the God that he loves so much. Again, the challenge today in our secular world is to keep the focus on faith. In convenings of Catholic university presidents over the last several years, it seems the recurring consensus is to focus on and stay true to the mission of the institution. It's what makes us different. It's what sets us apart, and it is what will draw students and their parents to us. The Apostolic Nuncio, in comments to the Catholic bishops, said our students should be taught how to pray and how to become familiar with Christ. They should experience how enriching is the encounter with the poor, the sick, the elderly, and the immigrant. It's a reality that's often excluded from a privileged society. And he echoes Pope Francis's hope that Catholic universities will continue to offer unambiguous testimony to their foundational Catholic identity. And I say these things to set the stage for our discussion because ultimately I believe the focus of a Catholic university is to create, or any university of faith I should say, is to create an atmosphere where our students can grow in wisdom and knowledge, can appreciate beauty and truth, deepen their faith, and I dare say, most of all, deepen their faith. As St. Francis University restructured itself in the last couple of years, restructured it from a business perspective, reshaped our schools, made some budget cuts, our lead-off statement was really to focus on the mission of the institution. We find that as we try to attract students to our school for a variety of reasons, our good academic programs, our sports programs, etc., at the heart of it we're finding that parents want an environment of faith and values for their students, and we realize the importance of staying true to that. Probably half our students at St. Francis are Catholic, which therefore means the other half are not. But for students who come to us from Protestant backgrounds, or even in some non-Christian backgrounds, parents of those students appreciate the fact that at St. Francis, their students can grow and deepen their faith. Once let's say, for example, a Methodist parent realizes that their son or daughter can have a relationship with Jesus Christ at St. Francis, it becomes okay for their student to go there. So for us, it really is about fostering an environment of faith and staying true to our mission. So I just want to, I know I've talked a lot, but I just want to pause there and just kind of open it up. And just to recap, the lead-off statement for us is to be true to our mission. We can weather any storm, be it financial, demographic, as long as we're true to our mission. So that's our starting point at St. Francis, and I hope that kind of sets a context for some discussion that we can have here. Rabbi.
Throughout what you said and I read what you wrote, I really tried to penetrate the idea of service. You said it, to serve. What does it mean to serve? Usually when we serve, you have a hierarchy. You have master and you have a servant. You serve because you have a master. So who do you serve?
Right off the bat, I mean, we're at the service of Christ. You know, as a Catholic school, we're trying, our mission is to, especially as Franciscans, to preach the gospel at all times, use words if necessary, lead by example. So we're serving Christ, but at the same time, by taking an attitude of service, we're trying to serve our students to help them grow in relationship as well.
And how does it apply to community, to serving the community? Because when you say you're serving Christ, it sounds like something which is very individual, like you close yourself, something even not egotistic, but something that you close yourself and you serve Christ, and that's it. And you are talking about communication with the community, and you talk about academia and service. How does it work together?
Well, taking another approach, when I look at the student body, and I think this will probably resonate with some of my colleagues as well, our students are very much into service, the act of serving, whether it's a project, mission trips. And so a lot of times that's our entry point for discussions about faith and spirituality, because the students, they love service projects, and it resonates with them. And then it's almost like we baptize it or attach a spirituality to it to show that it's something bigger than them individually, something that's done corporately, and something that has greater meaning.
I think that's a really interesting question. Whom are we serving? So when I think, because I must say, as a philosophy professor, I don't think of myself as a servant enough, But when I do, Pardon? Well, I'm sort of a head case, right? But when I'm serving others, I think the way we think of the word is, you can think of it as we're serving God, but we're serving others. So when you have a servant mentality, you're getting out of your own aims and but you're thinking of the others first. And so when I'm making a decision, should I help my graduate students here, or should I finish my own project? I'm just going to forget about my own project, and I'm going to help others. And I think that's the servant first attitude. I'm just suggesting that, but I think it's related to the idea of you're serving God, but it's not just about my own self. So that at Marquette we have the most number of service hours. So I don't know whether you have this concept, but service hours in the United States, and this is part of the Jesuit spirituality. But it does really help kids. They get out of themselves. They're not just thinking about themselves. They go into the community and they rebuild houses for poor people, and they have all kinds of. And they put these on their CV, of course. That's also another part of it, right? But they're for others and not just for themselves. Because I think this is maybe
Even the price, let's say, not your project, but contemplation and being a better Christian, coming close. So you abandon that in order to serve others.
So maybe I can continue because I think this is the way we are contemplating God, because we're thinking about God by not just thinking about myself, but thinking about others. I'm bringing God into my workplace. See, so this would be so. In a sense, I think justice is not about my good. I'm naturally inclined to my good, but justice is thinking about the goods of others. And when we think about the goods of others, we're taken out of our own project, and that also opens us up to God. I think that opens us up to God in some way. In some way, I think that the competition in the human heart is between all about myself, or I'm about something higher, something other than myself, ultimately about God. Augustine saw it that way. Excuse me.
Just in continuity, maar is een vrije mee. Just in continuity of that thought, would you go as far as saying that this idea of service is linked in a way to the suffering servant of Isaiah?
Mm-hmm.
Meaning, if we are talking about the Tikkun Olam, the reparation, the mending of the world,
Mm-hmm.
then in a way, we are in a kind of responsibility, a kind of spiritual atlas, kind of bearing the others, but caring for the others. Would that be a possible direction in your concept, in your, I would say, your great vision
Mm-hmm.
of serving the others?
Absolutely, and I think to tie it into the suffering servant, that makes a lot of sense, because when you look at it, in terms of, I'm thinking of the baptismal rite of the Catholic Church or any Christian. We're baptized into a set of relationships. So what happens to one happens to the other, whether it's joy or sorrow. So like you said, we're sharing that burden, and so I think that. So yes, I think that makes a lot of sense.
I would just to build on some of the things that are being said, and to answer, I think your excellent question, Shanta. I think the hope really through service is that there are a set of values that's really David's point, is a set of values that our students develop and that we develop. One of which is humility, humility about oneself. That we're in a world, the secular world is a world also of self-righteousness, and I think if you get outside of yourself and you meet people, particularly people outside your comfort zone, you get a more humility about your own views, and as well as and see that there's kindness and joy and beauty and a generosity in people that seem strange to us before we go into their communities. So I think, in terms of repairing the world, the idea of service, especially into communities where, for the most part, our students don't live. They live in, even our most modest students live in better communities than some of the impoverished areas that our service projects are. I think the hope is that there will be toleration for difference.
There is the movement in the United States of within servant leadership of the idea of what we call service learning. So regardless whether you're in physics or whether you're in education or you're in nursing, you will learn something within your classroom that you then apply in the community. So very much an application of the knowledge in the community. But there has been a slight movement or shift in this, where originally it was I'm serving others. So I'm going out, I bring something to the community doesn't have, I deliver that service, and then therefore I'm a good person for doing that. What wasn't happening was reciprocal learning of the individual going into community to serve, to learn from the community as well. And so in the United States, in this notion of service learning is now flipping this back to say, I'm not going to the community to to deliver, I'm going to the community to receive.
Community-based
that,
education,
right,
and a shift from service learning to community-based education.
to community-based, exactly.
So service is not a tax that you pay like income tax. You owe service to some, like the when you drive to it, you can get several hours of community service. That's not the idea.
That's not the
That's
idea.
not the idea.
It was, and it drove many ways even our admission decisions. So you do so many hours of service, therefore you're better prepared to come to our university, and then you're going to continue that there. It's community-based learning, and then you find the wisdom in the community, but then it has to be reciprocal. So often institutions of higher learning come to the community and bring their students and their faculty from a position of greater power, authority, and we actually have to find those relationships and develop them and sustain them in the community so that they can, that we're learning from them as well. And that's it's a switch, I think, maybe in the last decade where that's really kind of moved.
If I may, I have three observations about this discussion that just strike me. I mean, one of them is just a kind of general observation that the commandment to love God and the commandment to love your neighbor are inseparable commandments. And so you have to imagine what you're doing in service of God as in relation to the question of how you're being of service to others. The second is, and this really struck me in your remark about thinking about service learning and thinking about hours and so forth. I mean, you have to have structures. You have to enact some kind of pedagogical structures, but you also, we're constantly in danger of having these things subverted by metrics, because metrics are easier than prudence and good judgment. And so, part of what strikes me as important in the shift from service hours to community-based learning is it's a way to subvert the temptation to just reduce the thing to a counting game.
Right.
And I think we're always going to have to be moving that way. That's just a constant temptation in our world is to reduce the thing to metrics. But the other thing that strikes me, sorry, if I may, just one third thing, we've moved, this conversation sort of moved naturally to thinking about, service in terms of putting the students in a situation with people who have different experiences and so forth, and that as both a service to those people and as a formative experience for the students. But I think it's also really important, as a member of a faculty, to imagine ourselves as, we're providing a service, we're trying to be of service to our students, and so we're trying to think about
As
how is our...
opposed to what? Service to your students as opposed
to
what?
what's easy for you. I mean, I've been in discussions about what should our educational curriculum look like, where mostly it's easy to default as a faculty member to the criteria that, I want to give these kinds of classes because that would be really easy for me to do, without really saying, well, wait a minute, what do we think would be really of value? Like, what would it really mean to be of service to the students who come here and to provide them a formative educational experience that would help them to grow in the ways that are needful in the world of today? And, what's our role in trying to provide an education that's really of service in that way?
I appreciate that, what you said about moving away from metrics, because I know at our institution 15 years ago it was every student has to do 10 service hours.
Right.
And you would check the box, and you had somebody hold their hand to make sure they found the projects. But over the years, it's evolved. Like you're saying, there's a much richer component to it. It's finding a meaningful project, going into the community.
And someone follows you? How do you accomplish that?
Don't you have a write-up? And
It's
There's
a
a
moment of
presentation.
contemplation and reflection.
And there's a
writing
reflection.
of your experience.
Yeah. For ours,
So it's a
there's
mentored
reflection.
experience or an accompanied experience?
Typically, with a reflection aspect.
And it is, if I might just interject, it's what David had said, where you make the decision if I'm going to be of service to my project or I'm going to be service to my students. In
Right.
American higher education, it's not rewarded.
Yes.
So academic is not rewarded for the service, and then to send your students into the community to do this additional work, to have this incredible learning experience, takes a lot of work on the side of a faculty member to structure it in a way that it's meaningful, and they have reflection, and they have a way to to learn from that. But that's not rewarded in the promotion and tenure and how we're evaluated. We're evaluated as faculty based on our publications, our research, how many dollars we bring in for, if you're in the sciences in particular, not on how you have your students, what experiences they're having. Nor you can even argue that we don't get rewarded enough for good teaching, which this is all good teaching, actually. It's pedagogy, it's not.
So how do you initiate the students to do so?
How do you initiate the students?
Yeah.
Tell them.
No.
You want to get an
No,
A?
I mean, in order that it will be a meaningful action for them, and not just a mission as part of their curriculum.
Well, I can answer that. There's several of us. This begins. I think you mentioned, Malachi. You mentioned our students come to the university with an interest in service. We have 4 children. They all did service projects when they were 10 years old with their schools, and then through high school. So it's very much a part of our culture. The addition that Malachi talked about is the element of faith, and now we're teasing out how that's done in reflection and community-based learning. But most of us, we do at St. Mary's have an office, we call it an office of community engagement. So it's not so that the responsibility of connecting students to projects that are valuable to the classroom are not on the shoulders of the faculty, but are are offered by our staff who identify those projects and then work with faculty. So that's how it happens.
And along those lines, because we have an Office of Community Engagement as well, but then I think of our School of Business. They do a micro-lending project in Jamaica. So you have business students who you might not ordinarily associate with doing, service to the poor and needy. But here they are, they go to Jamaica, they do these micro-lending things. They're working with the poorest of the poor, and it really becomes, in some ways, it is a very positive experience, but then, the service to the poor and needy component comes out, but through the School of Business, which you might not ordinarily expect.
If I may ask, for me this ties in, maybe it'll sound as if it's a tangent, but a lot of my work at university, I teach history of science, but a lot of my work deals with administrative issues that are very quantitative, very ranked oriented, and it really resonated with me, the quote about the early university and about how they were in the growing city and everything was beginning to be quantified. They had clocks in the middle of the city. People were planning for tomorrow. What is that? And my question to you is, you talked about, and for me that was like a hint, you talked about restructuring that was done. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of pressure on your position, your position on the table, to work, to get into the rat race of where do we stand in the rankings, where do we stand, and so much so that even the concept of service is quantified into, so where do you stand with third mission, where do you stand with impact on the community, and how do we tally that up, how do you measure up? So my question to you is I want to put it less bluntly than I'm gonna, but this is what I have. How do you handle it?
All right. In terms of the quantifiable.
In terms of the mission statement that you started with, we want to instill this kind of deep faith-based approach to things, and on the other hand, the quantified side that structures everything that universities these days do.
Right. Well, I'll answer it, and if you need to refocus me, then please do. Because on the one hand, I'm a Franciscan, I'm a priest, and that conjures up a certain image. I'm nice, I'm kind, I'm friendly, At the same time,
that's the image?
I'm also a business person. But then I'm also running an institution, which is a business, and you have to make business decisions. And as a Franciscan, I've cut budgets, I've laid people off, I've had to make the tough decisions, all while focusing on this very important mission. And so, you're right. Where do you find that balance? I think, you know, it's also that balance between the university is the academy, and it's about higher learning and very important things, versus you have to worry about the income statement sometimes. So I think it's somewhere in the middle. It's keeping, I believe, keeping focus on the mission, but making the tough decisions so that the mission perpetuates itself. Does that, I don't know, is that?
Because when you mentioned St. Francis
Mhm.
as being the poor man who was able to come into that system, that more and more quantified system, and give it that extra depth,
Mhm. Yeah.
not by buying into the processes that were going on, but by inserting something, reminding them of something.
And I think in that spirit, then, it's almost like a return to the basics.
Yeah.
Here you have a very complex organization, a university, but it's so simple, it's profound. It's, you know, doing, you know, learning, teaching and teaching well, very thoughtful service projects, growing in the faith, just things that are so simple they are profound, almost like a return to the roots, you know, and staying focused on that in a simple, humble way, like St. Francis would.
The challenge is tremendous. The story of Good Samaritan, the Good Samaritan was poor and had nothing to worry about, so he could help the wounded person. And the Levite was busy, he had to care about budget, about the temple, about what's happening. And you are trying to combine both the Levite and the Good Samaritan into one person. I want to tell a personal story about service. I don't know, I was young once, really. I have documents to show that. In my younger years, I volunteered to be an ambulance driver. And at that time, you were a paramedic and ambulance driver combined. You had to do both the driving and the giving care. And all the people that were my age, and they ran to the exciting cases. But there was an old person that asked for help. No one liked to come. It's boring. It's not brilliant. It means that you are like you have to carry, and you do manual. It's a manual job. It's not brilliant. So I asked to give me these people, and also I served at night because they were busy during the day. So I asked to get the suicide attempts and to help. So one evening, there was a lady in Machne Yehuda who we visit once through a poverty-stricken area. And there was a lady that lived on the roof, on some kind of tent on the roof, and she burned herself because she tried to set fire to herself. A neighbor called us, came there, and there was nothing. She was in good condition. She didn't have to go to the hospital. So I started talking to her, and she told me about her family and about her son and the relationship with her son. And her son is a drug dealer, and she had very good reason to set fire to herself. And then I get my radio start ringing. They call me from the station. Where are you? She said, "I'm not with the case. She needs hospitalization." No. You had to give any treatment? No. What are you doing? Talking to her. She says, "No, you cannot talk. You have to come back to the ambulance station. You're on your
You have a mission.
So I said, "No, I'm volunteer. I'm not hired by you. You can fire me this second, but I'm here with this lady. I'm doing what the way I see it, because I do God's work and not your work. I don't owe allegiance to the office. I do it well myself." So, you know, when I thought about service, you mentioned service, I thought about that. Who do you serve, really? Who is your master? If you serve God, meaning that you set your rules, that you understand what the rules are better than the people that made the institution, better than the people that made the organization. You're on the spot, and you serve as you see fit. And everyone can jump, you know, everyone can do it. So it's a bit disorderly and a bit chaotic, but otherwise you're just a cog within the system. Isn't the idea when we spoke about humility in service? You really think a person has to be a cog within the system and accept that he's a cog within? Or when you have leadership and service, meaning.
Well, I think.
Wasn't this the point of the previous reading as well? That you do not change the system by upsetting it, but spiritualizing, revitalizing, making a covenant, if you will.
Yeah, that's what I did.
That was
That was the point.
And I think part of the leadership piece is to set the stage or to create an environment where someone can do what you just described. You know, the servant leader is going to say, "Oh, you have a great talent. You know, you might be an ambulance driver, but you're talking with this person." The leader is going to set the stage so that you can be, put it this way, your best self. You know, and I think from a Franciscan point of view, when you see God in all creatures, you're setting a stage where you're serving God. Almost like you're serving God through another person because God is in that person. That makes sense as well. And the leader is going to foster that environment.
So you actually independent servant.
It's like a faculty member.
Yes.
And I mean that positively. An expert in a particular field, it has to have that freedom to do certain things. But whereas the leader is going to set the stage for that.
Of I think when I'm teaching ethics, I'm teaching my students, it's called Potter's Box, written by Ralph Porter. And Porter is saying that one of the most main issues when you are coming to solve an ethical dilemma is the loyalty issue. Who is the priority among many loyalties that you have? Who is, when you are doing the priorities among it, who has the highest loyalty? Sometimes you have to be loyal to the institution. Sometimes you have to be loyal to the accountant. Sometimes you have to be loyal to God. Sometimes you have to be loyal to your neighbor. I mean, but you have to prioritize them.
It was a tremendous problem in the army. Religious people went to the army. This was political discussion here. You're loyal to the army or you're loyal to God.
Right.
And if you're loyal to God, you're a dangerous soldier. They should take away your weapons and put you in jail.
And the same thing can happen when you're a president of your university and you're loyal to the service, but on the other hand, you have to loyal to the budget, and you have to cut the budget.
That's well put.
I mean, after all, the main question is, who are you giving your loyalty as an ambulance driver? You are loyal to the lady on the roof, or you're loyal to the boss? You made your decision, isn't it?
And you could even be a little more radical when we come to the New Testament. You could also say, do we have a chance to interrupt the system again and again? So Romans 12, verse 1 and 2, don't make yourself, what is the English translation? I don't know. Me systematiziste to aioni tutto. Do not become part of the system of this aeon, of this age, but try to
reach the kingdom of heaven.
The kingdom of heaven. So how do you deal actually with this radical? You could be quite radical and say that the gospel, that the New Testament, that God's will is always something like the big interruption of our economic structure, of political structures, of military power systems.
Yeah.
So how do you deal in your tradition, for example,
like
with this big interruption of?
But that is
Actually, it's for me, it's one of the big questions.
Today we say disrupt.
I am in so much aspects part of the system, of course, and we are all, I think, part of our systems. But what about this big interruption God may bring, or religion may bring, or?
May I jump in with something? You wouldn't normally think of Thomas Aquinas as a revolutionary.
Not really.
And yet, he says that positive law definitely needs to be changed when it gets into conflict with natural law and divine law. So it is our systems, our positive legal systems, are man-made. They are institutionalized. They are positive. They are legislated. Divine law and natural law is something that we discover, right? This is just like the laws of nature. We did not legislate the laws of gravity. We discovered them, and it is this discovery that and this realization of what the true content of divine and natural law is that helps us realize that, oh, we went awry, we went astray with our recent legislations, etc. And that is when we do need to, and we have an obligation
And you have a collision.
to disrupt. We need to do the correction. No.
In a way, learning, if we are talking about the learning community, in a way learning is always about disruption. Because if you are only with yourself, you can go on with the monologue, but from the moment you are two, you are always not one, two or three or more, then you are disrupted in your monologue. So the learning community asks for disruption. Now, if this disruption has to do with the inspiration in the best case scenario, the Franciscan inspiration, then you can combine the learning community and in service of the learning community, which is at the same time a community which is inspired, which goes together. It is not necessarily a question of different loyalties. It's perhaps a question of nuances and seeing how this nevertheless different things are linked. You are interlinked. The learning community on the one hand, and the structure, the inspiring element, they are going together. It's not necessarily a contradiction.
Right.
It seems like, I mean, to be in a real conversation too, you have to be willing to be interrupted. I mean, I think that's one of the beautiful things that comes out of what you're saying. The difference between a conversation and a monologue. For you to be a good conversation partner is to be open to being interrupted yourself. And that's probably also true in terms of all these structures that we need for our educational mission, but always are constantly threatening to overwhelm the mission. We have to be prepared to be interrupted from them.
Yeah, I guess it's a precondition of a good conversation that you should be ready to be interrupted in your own monologue, because it takes the mutual recognition of the finitude of our individual minds. And this is precisely how we can complement and complete each other in a conversation.
What about humility that John mentioned?
Yes.
Humility, who are you to interrupt the system?
Oh, but no, but it is not the, we are talking about the interruption of a monologue now. It's not the interruption of the system. But, when it comes to the interruption of the system, it needs to be interrupted when it goes awry, when it gets in conflict with divine law and natural law. So, and that is the only justification, the only proper and commonly acceptable justification. Just think about the Declaration of Independence, right, of the United States. It starts out with the Declaration of Basic Human Rights, and that is the justification for the interruption of the system of the British rule, right? Because it's a long course of usurpations, etc., abuses and usurpations. That is precisely the genuinely acceptable rational justification for the interruption of the system.
And do you think
when the system grows corrupt?
Do you think that the people that wrote the Declaration of Independence, instead of being rich landowners, they were humble servants of God? They could have written such a declaration.
Yes.
Or they would say, no, we have to go along with God and the King and follow and not make waves.
No, when it is when it becomes obvious to the community and not just the one deranged individual, right? But when it becomes part and parcel of the common recognition that there is a long train of usurpations and abuses that cannot go on much longer, then there is a need, a genuine need for the interruption of the a system that is running down on the wrong track.
There are other values, courage being one of them that will also
Exactly. There's courage. Yeah. That takes a lot of courage.
Yeah.
To go against the system.
Could I say something about this theme of interruption? I think you have in mind, we have sort of a broken system, and how do we radically change it? So I'm inspired a little bit by this idea of the servant leadership in our earlier conversation. But so Aristotle's always talking about, and Aquinas picks up on this in a big way, the end. What is your end? So you have the means, right? So we have a structure, but what is our goal? So I think there's a transformation in terms of our end. If our end is loving God and putting things in order with the natural law, which is reality, this is not necessarily a disruption, is what I want to suggest. This is a transformation.
Setting things right.
Yeah,
right.
setting things right. But it's not just like, oh God, blow it all up. No, it's reminding ourselves of our mission, of our goal, and letting that goal transform, particular decisions of prudence here and there. So those decisions of prudence, when you look at it from the outside, well, how would you ever know what to do? But you got a good end, and you got wisdom, and this is the right way to go. You have to cut the budget sometimes, but the end helps you have the confidence to make those prudential decisions.
It strikes me that really what we're coming up against is exactly this problem of discernment of whatever the concrete good is in particular situations. I mean, it's a great problem of discernment to know when you need to interrupt, or when you need to be interrupted, or when you should honor the system that's in place and trust that it will work and so forth. I mean, these are great problems of discernment, and I don't think that there's a simple way around them. And it's why St. Thomas, by the way, says for Christians, the new law can never be inadequately written law. It has to just be docility to the Spirit, to the prompting of the Spirit, that you have to listen carefully and love in order to know what you should do next. And it requires all these things that you're talking about. I think as an educator, I mean, this thing about means and ends, you never heard so many conversations about means without clarity about ends, except in discussions of curricular reform. I mean, it's amazing that there isn't a pause to sort of say, what is the service? And this is a matter of discernment too, to say, what is the service that we need to be providing as educators? What is the service we're trying to render to our students? And how do we achieve that? Instead, it's always just a discussion about means and what we're ready and willing already to do, rather than what we might be willing to sort of persuade ourselves this is what we need to do, so we need to figure out how to do it.
I want to follow up on exactly that, but also a word about terminology. What makes me excited about the use of the word disrupt here is people that I know from different circles, that when they use the word disrupt in current nomenclature, it refers to situations where you reverse engineer whatever it is that you're looking at, say driving, getting from place to place. So you break it down to what is it that you need to do. You need to get from here to there. The system right now is broken, too much traffic, too much here, too much that. And then you rethink how you do it. You break it down to its purest component. You want to like get there. Help me get there. I can help you get there. I don't need a cab now. You can just drop by and take me, and you have Uber, right? So disrupting the system refers to actually drilling down on what is it that you want to achieve in the most direct way. What is it that you specifically right now want to achieve, not as the corporation, or do you want to have more faith? Do you want to be more conformistic? Do you want to be richer? Do you want to, and then what would you need to do that? And then people that want to make money, make an app out of it, right? But when you say disrupt in this sense, it makes me question, exactly like you questioned, when do we bring up the question of ends, right? So when you bring the question of ends in the modern sense of disrupt, which correlates with what I heard from Alexander, you asked it in a very personal way. You ask this of yourself, but you also ask this of each and every one of the students, not just of the faculty writ large. And we're going to hear more about this actually this afternoon.
May I ask you just a very concrete question? I think most of us here agree that the way of this, let's say, quantitative reduction of what a good teacher at a university is, having a lot of publications, raising a lot of money in order to have some research projects, we were talking about this, is a terrible mistake for our teaching processes. I think almost all of us agree, at least in Leipzig, we all agree that that's not the way we should teach theology. And you mentioned it as well, how to deal with that. So is kind of concrete disruption? Do you encourage your professors not to raise so much money, not to have so many applications, but to really?
I often think, what happened to wisdom? Wisdom, isn't that important?
But how? Yeah, of course. But how do people who are presidents and who have all this knowledge of service and things like that, how do you deal with that? Do you have a good solution how to escape this quantitative reductionism?
It's a treadmill that you don't use.
Yeah. Well, one of the answers, I mean, we're not all of the same kind of institution among the Catholic colleges and universities that are present here. Some of us are parts of what I would call research universities, and others, St. Mary's would fall into a different category where our faculty understand that their principal mission is to teach and to mentor and to advise. So that's a complicating factor. I think Malachi is, I believe, is at an institution very similar to mine, where our faculty do research, but we would all be shocked if anyone ever at St. Mary's University received a national research award of some kind. It's just not, we're not set up.
Considered to be a failure.
We're not set up, we don't have the laboratories, we don't have the graduate programs, we don't have doctoral programs. Indeed, we don't have doctoral programs. We are a largely undergraduate, and the graduate programs are professional, for the most part, professional master's programs. So that's one of the additions here that I know some of my colleagues here are at the universities. Boston College would certainly be one of them, where it is much more research focused.
So we open a new question. What is the ideal alumni of your institution?
The ideal alumni?
Yeah.
A rich person devoted to St. Mary's.
Future president here. Yeah, with no children. With no children. And ideally not married either. No. Well,
So actually, you're looking for Jesus.
I mean, to answer your question seriously, it is someone who has discerned, thinks about his or her career in vocational terms, that my role is in whatever profession I choose to enter, to obviously to be successful, but also to have a greater purpose in mind to better society, to better the workplace.
Contribution to this.
Yeah, to contribute, not to be siloed in oneself.
If I had the money,
And to be successful financially, so that you can give back to St.
if I had the money to donate to you, St. Mary's, and tell you, open a doctoral program, I'll finance.
If
And
you
then
were-
I'd be exposed to all the problems that Alexander said.
Would
you do it?
I would argue, I would try to persuade you to do something else, because I think that would be,
He's a good president.
that would be mission, that would be off our mission. That would take us in a direction that we do not want to go. So I would persuade you to support our undergraduate finance program, or to support the kind of program that Malachi has. We do too, a program where our business students are working in the community, doing projects, writing, white papers, business plans for startups, that sort of thing.
And I'm with you on that. It's almost like do few things but do them well. Like I too would try to persuade you and
Yeah.
keep it mission centric in
Yeah.
terms of within a certain parameter. You know,
And if I
otherwise
couldn't
it
do
just
that, I'd send you to
bleeds.
Boston College or
To Marquette.
And actually, Rabbi, at least.
Or Georgetown.
At least at institutions I've been to, the proposal to get a doctoral program in a department really does have a lot to do with metrics. It has to do with, well, here we are, we're an English department, these are our peer institutions, all these other English departments have doctoral programs, so why don't you? So even getting to the question of wisdom, even getting to the question of paideia, or doing a doctoral program right, you have to leap a hurdle, given judgments about how we can measure up to other institutions that we compete with.
This is anecdotal, but you know, we have this classification system that he sort of alluded to that classifies different kinds of higher educational institutions. And I'm told on good inside authority, Villanova launched recently a doctoral program in theology, and one of the reasons was they needed one more doctoral program to move into a different Carnegie classification.
I can confirm that.
It's how many
I was
graduates,
in-
it's how many graduates you
Right.
you
Yeah.
produce that have a doctorate, and it's not, the JD doesn't count in that, so it's, but a PhD in theology would. But you have to produce, the numbers are what matter in the Carnegie system. Where you- where you
Yeah,
end
it
up.
was significant. That was I was at Villanova at that time, and I
Right.
can confirm that is iterati.
Yeah, but I mean, that's a tail wagging the dog in a way.
Yeah. We have a large department, large philosophy department at Fordham, covering all disciplines and all historical periods. And so obviously it's a rather competitive place and very much research oriented as well as teaching. Teaching is very important too. We cannot escape the numbers game.
Yes.
But this is how it plays out. So we try to heed the advisements of wisdom and prudence, practical wisdom especially. So we do take into account obviously the number of publications, the scores of students, ratings, etc., etc. But it is we always talk them over. So it's whenever it comes to promotions, evaluations, contract renewals, etc. It is always a number of department meetings, very seriously going over the three main aspects of each candidate's work, teaching, resource, and service. And we do take into account the numbers, but weighing them very carefully. So it's deliberation, in the original sense of it, pondering the numbers for their true merit. That is, it is not just the number of publications, but where those publications appear. Taking into the specialties of the field that the candidate is working on. So it's whether in that field that there's a significant enough publication, what sort of impact it may have, and that's it. So we are not taking numbers at face value. We are pondering and deliberating over the genuine value of those numerical values.
Okay,
So that is the way. I cannot come up with a better idea because there is no algorithm for prudence.
Okay, so we're coming up on lunch, so if anybody has some closing remarks, some last question.
Well, very simply, don't be afraid to step out in faith. You know, the lesson learned, at least in our case, was really stay true to mission. You know, as a servant leader and one who tries to foster servant leaderships and others, provide folks with the tools to be successful, and really to set the stage for an environment of faith. And I'll conclude when I concluded my remarks, you know, a little while ago. The purpose of an institution of faith, be it Catholic, Jewish, an institution of faith, to help our students grow in wisdom and knowledge, appreciate beauty and truth, most of all to deepen their faith. So Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. So now we're going to